6 years. That's how long people waited for a follow-up to one of the greatest indie games ever made. When Hollow Knight, Silksong finally launched, it didn't just sell well, it broke storefronts on day one, spawned years of memes before it even released, and walked away with some of the biggest awards in gaming. And it's not slowing down. There's a new free expansion called Sea of Sorrow on the way, a visually overhauled Switch 2 edition of the original game, and physical releases for both titles landing this October. Here's the problem though. This is a genuinely massive story, and almost none of it is handed to you directly. It's told through implication, item descriptions, environmental details, and things you have to piece together yourself across 2 entire games. So let's piece it together. This is the complete story of Hollow Knight and Hollow Knight. Silksong, start to finish, in order, no gaps. Let's get into it. Quick warning before we go further. Full spoilers ahead for both games, including every single ending. If you haven't finished either one and want to go in blind, now's your exit. If you're new here, welcome. All right, let's rewind to before Hallownest, before the night, before any kingdom existed here at all. Long before any kingdom rose in this world, 2 forces already existed, older than memory itself. The first was the void, a formless, hungry, faintly conscious darkness pooling at the bottom of a bottomless pit called the abyss. Some nameless civilization worshipped it once, ages before any recorded history, and then vanished without much trace. The second was the radiance, a being of light who existed inside dreams themselves. A tribe of moths worshipped her as an actual goddess, and for a long stretch of this world's early history, she was simply the power that mattered. Every mind that dreamed of her. Then something arrived that had never existed here before, a worm, a vast serpentine being from somewhere else entirely, carrying the one thing this world didn't have yet: thought, structure, civilization. That worm would become the Pale King. The Pale King didn't so much conquer this land as upgrade it. Bugs who had only ever acted on raw instinct suddenly had society, purpose, government. He built Hallownest, a vast underground civilization, and ruled it as king. To secure his new kingdom, he made pacts with its most powerful regional rulers. 3 of them agreed to become what were known as dreamers, beings whose souls, even after death, could act as a living seal inside the dream realm. Lurien the Watcher ruled the City of Tears. Monomon the Teacher was a brilliant, obsessive scholar, and Hera the Beast ruled the Spider Kingdom of Deepnest. Hera's pact came with a cost nobody fully appreciated at the time. As part of the arrangement, she had a daughter with the Pale King. That daughter's name was Hornet, and she's going to matter for the rest of this story in both games. For a while, Hallownest thrived, but the Pale King's rise meant something uncomfortable for the old order. Bugs stopped dreaming of the Radiance and started dreaming of him instead, of civilization, of a future he'd built. A goddess who gets quietly replaced does not take it well. The Radiance's response was total. She began reaching directly into the minds of sleeping bugs across the kingdom, and what came out the other side wasn't a person anymore. It was a mindless husk, driven by her will, eyes burning orange. This became known as the infection, and because it spread through dreams themselves, there was no wall high enough and no army strong enough to stop it. Hallownest, this entire glittering civilization, began rotting from the inside out. The Pale King's answer to an enemy that couldn't be fought head-on was as brutal as it was clever. If the Radiance needed a mine to latch onto, Then the fix was to build something with no mind at all. Working with his queen, the White Lady, a being deeply tied to the void herself, he created what were called vessels, void-formed children with no thoughts, no will, and no dreams of their own. Being so empty, the infection would have nothing to grab. Thousands were bred in the abyss. Most were judged imperfect and simply discarded. But one was different, raised alongside the royal family, trained, and eventually judged pure enough for the role it existed for. It became known as the Hollow Knight. The Pale King sealed the radiance directly inside his chosen vessel and chained it within the Black Egg Temple, at the very heart of the kingdom. Lurien, Monomon, and Hera, Hornet's own mother among them, layered their dreamer seals over the prison as a final safeguard. For a time, it held. Hallownest flourished, but hollow turned out to be an overstatement. Somewhere inside that supposedly empty vessel was still one small, quiet spark, a fragment of love for the father who raised it. That was all the crack the radiance needed. Slowly, she began seeping back through. The infection returned, and this time it didn't stop. Hallownest collapsed for good. The Pale King, having failed the one plan he'd staked everything on, simply wasted away into nothing, leaving his kingdom to rot in silence. This is where the first game picks up, years, maybe decades, after Hallownest's fall. You play as the Knight, a small, silent, horned vessel, one of the thousands discarded in the abyss and left for dead. Somehow, it survived. It wandered the wastes above. And now, for reasons it doesn't fully understand, something is pulling it back down into the ruins of the kingdom that made it. It arrives at Dirtmouth, a nearly abandoned town sitting on top of Hallownest's remains. Its only resident of note is the weary, kind Elderbug, and starts climbing down into the dark. What follows is one of the biggest, most interconnected descents in gaming, and it's packed with characters who genuinely matter. Cornifer, a cheerful cartographer, mapping the ruins as he goes. Zote the Mighty, a loud, spectacularly incompetent, self-proclaimed hero who's convinced he's the main character of this story. Quirrell, an easygoing wanderer who turns out to have a far deeper connection to this kingdom than his casual attitude lets on. The Nailsmith, forging better weapons for a knight he assumes is destined for greatness. And again, a masked figure who challenges the knight to duels for reasons entirely her own, Hornet. Deep in the Queen's gardens, the knight can also meet the White Lady herself, root-formed, grieving, and guarding pieces of the truth about what the vessels really are and why they were made. Eventually, the real objective comes into focus: track down and defeat the three dreamers, Lurien, Monomon, and Hera, to break their seals on the Black Egg Temple. None of them are villains. They're not guarding that prison out of malice. They gave up their lives essentially to hold a plague in check. Breaking their seals means undoing the very thing standing between the world and total collapse, which makes each of those fights feel less like a victory and more like a quiet tragedy, especially the third one, when it turns out to be Hornet's own mother. Along the way, the knight also has the option to go deep, literally. Descending into the abyss itself, past thousands of other discarded vessels, down to a place called the Birthplace, where it can claim an item called the Void Heart. Full unity with its own void nature. It's entirely optional. It also completely changes how the story is allowed to end. Once all three Dreamer seals are broken, the Black Egg Temple opens, and which ending you get depends entirely on what the knight is carrying into that final fight. Ending 1 the Hollow Knight, the default outcome. Without the Void Heart, the knight enters the temple and fights its own sibling directly. It's a brutal, genuinely sad battle. Partway through, the Hollow Knight starts stabbing itself, some last fragment of will fighting the Radiance's control from the inside. Win, and the knight simply takes its place, sealing itself inside the temple with the infection and restarting the exact same cycle with a new prisoner. Quiet, grim, and deliberately unresolved. Ending 2. Sealed Siblings. A darker secret variant of that same fight, unlocked if the knight has killed Hornet earlier in the journey instead of sparing her. The tone shifts from quiet sacrifice to something colder and lonelier. Ending 3. Dream No More. This is where the Void Heart matters. Carrying it, plus an upgraded Dream Nail, into the final fight changes everything. Instead of just battling the Hollow Knight's corrupted body, the knight gets pulled directly into the Dream Realm and confronts the Radiance herself. Empowered by its own void nature, and, if the knight has bonded with its fellow discarded vessels along the way, by their combined will too, it defeats her there, at the actual source of the infection, instead of just resealing the symptom. Most players treat this as the true ending of the base game, the one that actually breaks the cycle instead of repeating it. Ending 4. Embrace the Void. This one needs the Godmaster DLC added free after launch, and it's brutal to earn. Godmaster opens up Godhome, a standalone arena realm run by a hidden character called the Godseeker, where the knight has to fight escalating tiers of pantheons, boss rush gauntlets that string together every major fight from the entire game, back to back, with no real breaks. The final and hardest of these, the Pantheon of Hallownest, strings together over 40 bosses in a row and ends with an even more powerful version of the final boss, the Absolute Radiance. Beta, and the void that's been quietly gathering inside the Godseeker this whole time finally erupts, forming something called the Shade Lord, which doesn't just contain the Radiance, it destroys her, permanently, removed from existence, not sealed away. A large part of the community treats this as the real true ending, since it's the only outcome where the Radiance is actually gone for good. A full side story worth its own space. The Grim Troop. Light an old abandoned lantern out in the howling cliffs, and the Grim Troop arrives in Dirtmouth almost overnight. Tents pitched, torches lit, a travelling circus that clearly isn't from around here setting up shop in this quiet, dying town. Their leader, Grim, hands the knight a charm called the Grim Child, a small nightmare imp companion that rides along and fights at its side. The catch is what the Grim Child actually needs to grow. Grim's followers, the Grimkin, are scattered across Hallownest hunting for nightmare flames, and the knight's job is to track the Grimkin down in turn and feed what they're carrying back into the Grim Child. Each batch matures it a little further, and partway through, Grim steps in himself to test the knight directly in a full boss fight as Troopmaster Grim. It's only near the end that the real picture comes into focus. The troop are servants of something called the Nightmare's Heart, a being born from nightmares itself, bound to a ritual with no natural end. Harvest flames, grow a Grim Child, kill the current host, let the heart be reborn into the new one, over and over, forever. One troop member, Brum, has quietly had enough of it and offers the knight a way out. Destroy the nightmare lantern instead and banish the whole troop before the ritual completes. So it's a real fork, not just a difficulty setting. Finish the ritual, and the knight has to dream nail a sleeping Grim to reach his true dream form, Nightmare King Grim, one of the hardest fights in the entire game, and beating him lets the nightmare's heart pass peacefully into a fully grown Grim child, who stays on as a loyal companion while the rest of the troop departs. Or side with Brum, break the lantern, and banish them all outright. No final boss, but also no fully grown Grim child, and a dazed, freed version of Brum named Nim left behind in Dirtmouth instead. There's a third, much smaller free DLC too, Hidden Dreams, which doesn't add story so much as 2 extra optional boss fights and a shortcut through the map. Worth knowing it exists, not worth its own chapter. Small story, same big question as everything else in this game. Is it better to keep a cycle running because it works, or to break it and live with what's left? And there's one more secret worth remembering, because it pays off later. Tucked away in a hidden corner of the map is a strange little mushroom-headed wanderer. Talk to him in the right spots, in the right order, and he eventually just launches himself into the sky and disappears. At the time, it reads as a throwaway joke. It wasn't. However Hollow Knight ends for you, the infection is dealt with, and Hallownest, ruined as it is, finally gets to rest. Hornet, surviving in every ending that matters going forward, keeps watching over what's left of her home as its guardian. Until, one day, she doesn't come back. Hornet is captured by a group of veiled outsiders and hauled off to a kingdom she's never even heard of. This is where Silksong begins. The game opens mid-transport. Hornet, caged, being carried away by her captors. A stray silk fly slices the binding rune on her cage. She breaks free and drops straight down into the moss grotto, alone, in completely unfamiliar territory. That territory is Pharloom, once a grand religious kingdom built entirely around the worship of silk, now a crumbling, haunted shell of itself. Something called the haunting has taken hold here. A madness that reanimates the dead and twists silk-touched creatures into aggressive puppets. It's not the infection, but it rhymes with it uncomfortably well. Hornet gets her bearings with the help of a chapel maid, then makes her way to Bone Bottom, a small pilgrim camp, Pharloom's answer to Dirtmouth, and the game's first real hub. She learns her captors belong to something called the Citadel, a supposedly holy institution at the very peak of Pharloom that draws pilgrims from across the land. If she wants answers for why she was taken, that's where she has to climb. So she climbs. Along the way, she runs into a familiar face, Zote, the same hapless hero from the first game, still chasing glory, still spectacularly bad at finding it, plus a whole new cast. Sherma, an earnest pilgrim on his own parallel journey through the kingdom. Chakra and Garmond, warriors defending refugees from the haunting. A travelling flea merchant caravan, and a culture built heavily around bells and ceremonial song, which is also how Hornet unlocks fast travel, by freeing a massive silk-bound bell beast and taming it as transport between bellway stations. And then there's Lace, an elegant, lethal bug woven entirely out of silk, who confronts Hornet directly at the deep docks and keeps reappearing throughout the climb, clearly protecting something. Or someone. As Hornet climbs, Pharloom's real history starts falling into place. Long ago, spider-like beings called Weavers were ascended, granted power and purpose, by a godlike entity known as Grand Mother Silk. They worshipped her as their creator, right up until they realized the truth. They were never going to become gods themselves, only servants. So they rebelled and sealed her into a deep, forced sleep inside a chamber called the Cradle, right at the kingdom's summit. Not every weaver stayed to help build the world their descendants would inherit. Some left Pharloom entirely, scattering to distant lands. One of them, a weaver named Hera, ended up in a completely different kingdom, married into its royalty, and became a dreamer. Yes, that Hera, Hornet's mother. Hornet isn't just a stranger passing through Pharloom, she's descended from it. Over the centuries, Grandmother Silk's seal weakened, especially once the Citadel started experimenting with raw, unfiltered silk for its own power. Her influence began leaking back out into the world as the Haunting, and alone, sealed away, with no one to actually care for her, Grandmother Silk did something that echoes the Pale King's story in an eerie way. She made herself a daughter, spun entirely from silk, and named her Lace. But a half-conscious, imprisoned goddess makes for a pretty absent parent. Lace grew up starved of real care and grew into exactly what you'd expect. Brilliant, dangerous, and quietly furious. It's implied that the entire reason the Citadel captured Hornet, along with other lost descendants of the Weavers scattered across the world, was to drag Weaver blood and power back home, to help fully wake Grandmother Silk once and for all. Hornet eventually reaches the Citadel itself and has to learn a ritual called the Threefold Melody just to earn passage up to the cradle. Waiting for her at the top, once again, is Lace, and this time the fight is final. Hornet wins, and in defeat, Lace's mask finally slips. She admits just how disillusioned she's become with her own existence, an unnatural creation who never asked to be made and never got to choose anything about her own life. Then Hornet faces Grandmother Silk herself. And this is where the story branches into 6 different endings. Ending 1, Weaver Queen, the most common outcome and the one most first-time players will see. Hornet defeats Grandmother Silk and chooses to bind her power, absorbing it directly. Her body starts to change, extra silk-spun limbs, a new and unsettling form. She becomes Pharloom's new ruler, but nothing is actually freed. The kingdom is still bound in silk. It's just her silk now, a victory that curdles the second it lands. Ending 2, Twisted Child, a darker secret variant of that same final fight. If Hornet is carrying a curse picked up from an item called the Twisted Bud, found in the grim Bilewater region, the victory scene changes entirely. Instead of ascending, Hornet and Grandmother Silk grotesquely fuse into a single, tree-like monstrosity. Widely considered the bleakest ending in the game, Ending 3, Snared Silk, the one that matters most because it's the door to everything else. Instead of binding Grandmother Silk's power to herself, Hornet, with help from Pharloom's snail shaman elders, sets a trap, using an instrument called the Needlin to tear open a portal straight into the void and drag Grandmother Silk through it. But Grandmother Silk grabs on, threatening to pull Hornet in with her. Lace intervenes, cutting her own mother's arm and stabbing her free with her pin, saving Hornet, but getting swept into the void herself in the process. The portal slams shut, Hornet is knocked down into the depths, and shockwaves of void corruption burst up through every silk thread in Pharloom, throwing the whole kingdom into crisis. This is the credits point for Act 2. Reload the save though, and the story isn't over. Act 3, The Abyss. Pharloom is now warped and void corrupted. Hornet has to descend into a nightmare version of the kingdom she's already crossed once, guided partway by a protective white flower connected to old, half-remembered events back in Hallownest, all the way down to the true final confrontation. Ending 4, Sister of the Void. The true ending, and genuinely one of the best payoffs in either game. Deep in the abyss, Hornet finds Grandmother Silk ensnared in the void, with a corrupted, hostile version of Lost Lace as the true final boss. After a brutal fight, Hornet beats the Void's grip out of her. And here's the twist. Grandmother Silk wasn't purely acting out of cruelty this whole time. She'd been trying to shield Lace from the Void, using her own silk to build the very arena protecting her. In her final moments, she gives up everything she has left, all her remaining power, just to help Hornet and Lace escape. It's still not quite enough. As the Void closes back in around them, a familiar shape appears. The Knight. In its ascended Shadelord form, alongside the same Voidkin siblings from the end of the first game, it carries Hornet and Lace safely out of the Void and back toward the surface, before vanishing back into the abyss's depths. With Grandmother Silk gone, the void-soaked threads holding Pharloom hostage finally dissolve. Lace wakes up beside Hornet, and for a moment, after everything, the two of them just breathe. It's the most hopeful ending Silksong offers, and it's also a direct, deliberate confirmation that the Knight survived Hollow Knight and is still out there, somewhere in the dark, watching over the people who mattered to it. Ending 5. Passing of the Age. A bonus scene layered onto the true ending. Remember that strange, mushroom-headed wanderer from the end of Hollow Knight? He's back, because of course he followed her here too. Track him down across every one of his hidden appearances scattered through Pharloom, and after the true ending plays out, you get one more scene. Him launching himself off into the stars, again, followed by 4 words on screen. To be continued. And that's genuinely where things stand right now, in real life, as you're watching this. Silksong isn't finished growing. Team Cherry has confirmed the Free Sea of Sorrow expansion, adding new areas and bosses to Hornet's story sometime in 2026. The original Hollow Knight is getting a visually overhauled Switch 2 edition. Physical releases for both games arrive this October, and that to be continued card sitting at the end of Silksong's true ending is still completely unexplained. 2 games. One long, quiet tragedy about a kingdom that tried to seal away a god instead of reckoning with her, and a second kingdom, half a world away, that made almost exactly the same mistake in a different shape. The void against the light. Parents against the empty children they built to survive them. And somewhere in the middle of all of it, a mushroom man just having the time of his life. That's the complete story. Hallownest's fall, the Knight's choice, and everything Hornet uncovered climbing Pharloom. If I missed a detail you love, or you've got a theory about where To Be Continued actually leads, drop it in the comments. This lore clearly isn't finished yet. If you enjoyed this, the subscribe button's right there for more.